Welcome, everyone. Hello. It's wonderful to have you with us today. On behalf of the government of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg and the World Resources Institute, you are warm welcome to join us in the high-level panel for cycling as a mobility solution for challenging times. Thank you for being with us. I would like to share with you all our agenda for this webinar. We will start with welcome and introductions from Minister Francois Bausch and the Director of the WRI Rose Center for Sustainable City, Annie Dasgupta. We will have the Deputy Mayor of Paris, France, David Valliard, who is going to talk about the Paris experience on cycling. Then Michael Colville-Andersen will join us for an inspirational talk. And finally, we're going to have a panel discussion with a high-level group: Francois Bausch, Minister Dagmar Moes, Minister Philippe Henry, and Secretary of Mobility Nicolas Stupinat. Without further delay, I would like to welcome Minister Francois Bausch, the Minister for Mobility and Public Works of the Government of Luxembourg. Hello, Minister. How are you today?
Hello, Claudia. Like it is already said, my name is Francois Bausch. I'm the Minister for Mobility and Public Works of Luxembourg, and it is my pleasure to co-host this webinar on cycling with the World Resources Institute. We did not need this pandemic to realize that cycling is part of the answer of many global problems, from climate change to health, equality, road safety, and road congestion. But this pandemic has revealed how people instinctively turn to cycling in times of health and crisis, and they do so for different reasons. In many large cities, commuters turned to cycling because they wanted to avoid public transport but did not have a private car or did not want to stuck in traffic with it. In my country, where almost every adult does own a car, there still was a sudden rush on cycling stores. It seems that in the pandemic, people realized now that cycling is really good for them, not only for physical reasons, but also for other reasons. So many people suddenly start cycling not only for physical reasons, like I said, but because they felt it is good for them, and they saw that really public space is better disponible for that. For one reason or more, so many people could suddenly start and also cycling because the cars were largely absent. As the lockdown eased, the cars returned, and as the cars returned, the cyclists retreated back to the few places where they could cycle safely. But now this whole new section of the population has discovered cycling. And as a minister, I notice a new cyclist lobby. They want to keep doing what they discovered during the lockdown. They want to cycle safely and not just on some seat cycling route for tourists, but every day, everywhere. Making that possible has to be our objective, because cycling is one of the most beautiful ways of breathing. And now, more than ever, the world needs to breathe. And so cycling is really lives a renaissance that we could never had imagined before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Bausch, and you are so right. We didn't need a pandemic to realize that cycling needs a space in cities, a real one. Now, it is with great delight that I want to introduce the Director of the WRI Rose Center for Sustainable Cities, Annie Dasgupta. Hello, Annie. How are you doing today?
Good, good. I'm actually doing much better today than I was doing last week. Claudia, thank you. Minister Bausch, it's an absolute privilege to host this with you, this particular discussion. And I want to warmly welcome all of you who have joined it, and thank you for all our panelists who are very busy people to be here. This as Claudia said, I head the Ross Center, and we work about 110, 20 cities across the world, partnering with them. But the other thing we do is actually learning from the cities and see what do cities need, what's happening globally, and how can we push sustainable cities agenda further. So from that perspective, I want to share a couple of observations. But before I do that, I just want to say this is personal for me. I mean, like all of you, I think, I don't know if all of you are still working from home. We are. I've been working from home for the last 8 months. And I actually am not one of the person who likes working from home. I miss seeing my colleagues at work, but what I really miss is my 10-mile ride in the morning to get to work and my ride back. I really, really miss it, because that actually, as Minister Bausch said, makes my day. So with that perspective, this pandemic actually has shaped our cities, impacted cities in many different ways. And I want to share with you a couple of thoughts from that. The pandemic is very urban centric. Not only the incidence of disease that has taken place, but also the economic fallout, people who are out of jobs. And we in WRI have been focused on, okay, what are we learning from what's going on? And what is that? We all see this in the news every day, but what are we learning? I think the 4 things that is on top of our agenda that I want to share with you, which I'm sure we will hear from our panelists in a minute. One is this pandemic impact of the planet is very unequal. I mean, poor people, they didn't start with poor people, are impacted both economically and the disease-wise by far. The data from across the world is absolutely unanimous in this, how unequal them. Second is the impact on mobility, which is what we're talking about, is enormous, both in a negative way of what's happening to public transport, but also positive way of what we're going to discuss today. The third is actually finances of cities. I hope we discuss this. This has been for services provided by cities. Even the biggest public transport companies are in a difficult position, starting from New York to all those cities we can talk about. So in this impact on cities is kind of critical of what's going on, and which is all of our mind. But there is a silver lining. It's hard to say in this middle of this pandemic to talk about silver lining, but there is a silver lining. Is what we are seeing across the city, the political space is opened up for innovation, specifically in walking and biking. You will hear today from cities that are forefront, from Paris. Deputy Mayor, thank you for joining us. But not only in Paris, you will hear from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia what's going on, and from Nicholas what's going on, how these cities have captured the political space that opened up, the opportunity to open up without car cities, and created spaces for biking and walking. And this is critical, that has taken place, and it's very positive. There's a positive momentum on this. I just want to share with you that this has happened at a time, of course, in very little cars because of the economic slowdown and offices being closed. But cycling, our ability to cycle on streets or walk in the streets is directly connected to how safe the streets are. These are interconnected issues. So in New York City, for example, during the pandemic, more women actually rented city bikes than they used to do before. Why is that? Because they feel more comfortable, more safer riding this. So I want to think about this cycling and walking agenda to how safe it is for us to go out. If someone was worried they'll be hit by a car, they're not going to be walking or biking on streets. So the agenda for us going forward, and this is what we're looking forward to hear from all of your fantastic panelists here, is how do we make these changes that's taken place in our cities permanent? How do we create policies, political momentum to see these changes that's taken place, which are absolutely fantastic, from Paris to Milan to Bogota, to Addis, to permanent part of our policy. And what people like us are very interested in, I know Minister Bausch, you're interested, that how do we reimagine public transport differently as we go forward? And we have an opportunity here because public transport companies are really in dire straits. We have to reimagine anyway, financially and otherwise. But how do we reimagine public transport that is not just mechanized mobility, but also non-mechanized mobility, and biking becomes a central part of that solution. So that is what I'm excited about. I'm really looking forward to Claudia and Minister this panel, which is people who actually have experience on the ground, what they're doing, and their views of how can we actually work together to make this permanent. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you very much, Annie. And I can't agree with you more than biking makes us really happy. And, how do we do it? How do we make it safer for everyone? How do we create cities that are equal so that everyone can really join in bike and walk and use mass transportation in our cities? That is what is the conversation today. And I'm going to ask now to join the Deputy Mayor of Paris, David Belliard, who is going to tell us what he's been doing in the past months in Paris. We have seen that Paris has transformed to a city where cycling is really booming. So very, very happy to introduce you the Deputy Mayor of Paris, David Belliard. Please.
Merci, thank you, and hello everyone for inviting me. And sorry in advance because I will speak in French and not in English, but I take advantage and enjoy the translation for my speech. Alors, en effet, la question est primordiale de la révolution aujourd'hui des mobilités, et cette révolution des mobilités pour une ville comme Paris qui est en train
de revolution that we're going through in the city of Paris. We're going from a car-centered city because that's been the way that Paris has been conceived, really. 40, 50 last years conceived as a car-centered city. A city that gives more space now to cycling. And this is a momentum that's just accelerating a lot during this public health issue of the pandemic. But really, it's also an evolution that's a lot deeper than that. And if you allow me, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to remind everyone how things have evolved in Paris, of course, but I believe in other major cities. This mobility revolution is not only a response to COVID-19, it's a response to many challenges, greater challenges in our cities. So, of course, ecologically speaking, there is a public health challenge that goes way beyond COVID-19, just public health in general, and also socially, to revamp, to retake public spaces in a city like Paris. Ecologically speaking, of course, I don't have to go into the details, but the numbers are there. And, because of climate change, we know that there's a lot of problems with pollution, especially in our city. Around 33% of energy consumption in 2015 and more than 90% years later. And so 39% of total emissions, CO2 emissions, we see in the city. So this issue of transportation, we know this is a way to fight against climate change. It's a way to improve our environment, especially the urban environment. And so we've had to face this issue to lower CO2 emissions, or greenhouse emissions, and public health. We know that road traffic in a city like Paris, or like any major metropolis, we know we have the release of toxic substances, chemical substances that make us sick. And many studies have shown the impact of air pollution because of the circulation of cars. And pollution in Paris is quite linked to 50 or 60% of car traffic, despite all of the efforts that we've undertaken. So you can see direct correlations between pollution of microparticulates and also greater circulation of cars through the city. And so the number that we usually mention, 2,600 premature deaths in Paris, 6,000 in France a year. I mean, these are numbers that evidently show us to what extent this public health issue is not only talking about COVID, but even more so, it has to do with public health especially related to air pollution and any other respiratory or cardiovascular disease. And perhaps something that's usually not so approached, but this was mentioned in the introduction, the issue of space, public space. A city like Paris, uh, half of the public spaces are given to individual cars. Individual cars represent today only 13 to 50% of trips in Paris. So on one side, we have 50% of public spaces that are dedicated to individual cars, especially in the downtown area, especially used by men that are above 50 years of age that use their cars individually. And half of the public spaces are dedicated to this. And so when we come up to a cycling policy and cycling policies that we've been developing for the last 5 or 6 years. And so we are participating to requalify public spaces. So what we've been doing is we're giving these public spaces back to the people, used by all parts of the population. Less than 35% of Parisians have a car nowadays, for example. And so, half of the spaces are used by a small part of the population. It's men usually. And so we are retaking these spaces and giving these spaces back to people who are cyclists. This is a practice that's a lot more democratic, a lot more accessible to women, for example. Some months ago, a huge increase in the use of bicycles in Paris, especially bike rentals by women. And so this is a public policy that in a certain way is of social redistribution, if you will. If we consider public spaces, as we're considering here, as a common good that needs to be more equally and equitably shared between all users of the city. And this is especially true in a city like Paris, that's a very condensed city. It's like 10 by 10 kilometers, basically. Because of our history related to a fortress. And so, of course, we're different from other major cities like London or Berlin. Paris is a very dense city, and Parisians, they live in tiny apartments, and public spaces represent a sort of extra space for them, out of their tiny apartments, cramped apartments. And so people always seek this extra space in our public spaces. And so it has to do with social justice as well, when you stop to think about it. Social justice. And so that's basically the general challenges. Now, talking about social and public health, we need a policy that has to do with the historical process, so that Paris, historically speaking, has always favored individual cars, like other major cities in the 20th century. From 1970 to 1990, we see cars are the kings of the streets. And basically people don't use their bikes because they think it's too dangerous. In our archives, we can see a lot of these examples. Cyclists lost in a tsunami, if you will, of cars. And so you have to be very brave, to take on the streets of Paris on your bike. At least that used to be so. And so a city that was really designed for cars.
Automobile et
In 1991, things started to change. And so this is where we are now, since the 90s, basically. Now a city that is really designed for cars. But other cities have taken a different direction. But we are part of the statistic because we have an automobile industry that's very strong in France. And so progressively, bicycles started coming back. Like I said, in the 90s, this wasn't so, and we had to change things around. 95, we started to see a lot of paralyzation in France, and many news reports on French TV showing something new, revamping cycling. 2001, a new majority in Paris, even if bike paths and bike lanes were still being augmented, but the last mayor, Jean proposed more bike lanes and bike paths that at the time we used to call death
Elles
lanes
étaient peu avenantes et qu'on
because
n'avait
it
pas
was so dangerous. And people really didn't want to use them. Now, 2001, a new majority, and of course, I'm an ecologist, so I would say this was a green wave that would accelerate revamping bicycles. And in 2005, the installation of the bike sharing program in Paris, and perhaps not such a great start, but quite utilized by the youth in Paris that gave a new image to the use of a bike in Paris because they're quite used to using bicycles. They're a little bit more courageous than other adults. In 2007, multi-lane bike paths, and after 2014, strong acceleration in the use of bicycles, a master plan that was developed, 200 million euros invested to increase our bike lane and bike path infrastructure in Paris. And this, of course, corresponds to the arrival of electric bicycles as well. And after 2018, 2020, an explosion, a real boom in cycling in Paris. And strikes in 2019 that we had, these strikes had beneficial impacts on the use of bicycles in Paris. We have too many strikes in France. And of course, with the use of a bicycle, you could avoid, many of the negative impacts of the strikes in the city. And this allowed new stakeholders to use bicycles on our streets. And so this really helped us, especially with electric bicycles. And of course, the COVID-19 crisis actually has helped us a lot in increasing the use of bicycles. Now, existing infrastructure that we've developed during the last few years, which allows for users to use them with greater safety and security, a lot more than in the past. And so all of a sudden, many people are noticing that, sometimes you can arrive at home in 15, 20 minutes if you just grab a bike. And the public health crisis, of course, bicycles became an alternative mode of transportation than the metro system or buses or taxis or Ubers, because it helps with social distancing, an important dimension in order not to spread the virus. And it's an alternative mode of transportation that's quite affordable and accessible. But of course, there are people that cannot go to work on their bike. I mean, people like myself, for example, where I'm here talking on Zoom, that's okay. But of course, most of us are at home and we don't have to go to work. But a major part of the population in the first phase of confinement had to displace themselves. This is a low or mid-income population in Paris. And so we offered an alternative mode of transportation to all of these people because those that have to get about in the city, you don't have to take the metro or the bus or anything else. You can take your bike, and your bike um, is an excellent way, especially now with electric bicycles. So it's quite affordable. It's quite an interesting mode of transportation, and it's a great way to get around the city. Very popular and socially quite equitable. You can see the success in, the Rue Rivoli that used to be terrible traffic jams. Now is a wonderful 100 kilometers of new bike paths and bike lanes during lockdown. And now we have more kilometers that have launched since yesterday, especially in the north of Paris. But Rivoli was reopened. And so in September, more than 20,000 bicycles. And so that's been a record for us. And it's really the most used bike lanes and bike paths in Europe, amongst the top 5. And so this is why with this transformation and infrastructure and political will, you can have this in basically any city. Uh, Nowadays, we see these this protection infrastructure to protect cyclists from other cars, like we have here in Pont de la Concorde. And so, of course, we have other types of infrastructure, such as these bike lanes. And so this will become permanent, okay? There are many, many kilometers that will remain permanent in Paris, even after the pandemic. So this is to meet a demand that it's not just because of the current situation, but this is a structural demand. So very quickly, just to finish with my participation, this couple of minutes that I have left, we can see that to continue to support the development of cycling in a city, you have to continue developing cycling infrastructure everywhere throughout the city. And that's our goal, to make Paris 100% cyclable, the city where a small child can take their bike and, feel totally safe. And that's a success indicator, I think, when kids can ride their bikes safely on the streets. And of course, there's another dimension that seems to be important to highlight. I rapidly talked about this. Paris is a city that has a lot of urban sprawl in its periphery, despite being a very condensed downtown area. This has to do with historical reasons of the 19th century. So it's a physical and mental barrier. And we're now into a new phase, a metropolitan phase, so that Paris can communicate better with its neighbors. And bicycles are a great opportunity to rebuild a network between the hypercenter of our metropolis and the rest of Paris, and the outskirts of the city and the suburbs. It's what we call Vélopolitain, not Métropolitain, but Vélopolitain. And so Vélopolitain is this network, a network of bike lanes and bike paths in Paris, but throughout the metropolis. We already have the business district connected to the entire metropolitan region. And it's a huge success, the use of this bike lane, especially used by even business executives that want this to be permanent. Okay, so I could still talk a lot about all of the support that's provided, the entire cycling ecosystem, capacity building, training, procurement, and also repairs and maintenance, and overall support to the cycling ecosystem that we've been developing in Paris. We're presenting a master plan next year, a new master plan, where we're going to continue developing the use of bicycles by Parisians and proposing infrastructure that's not only bike lanes and bike paths, but also safe parking for bicycles, to value a positive image with the use of the bicycle, because it's true, because it's very enjoyable and it's great to ride your bike in Paris. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Wonderful presentation. And so beautiful to see how Paris is really changing. I can't wait to go and visit, of course. But you mentioned a couple of things that are really important. 2,600 premature deaths because of the quality of air. How is it possible that we keep accepting this in our cities? And how easy in few months has been to really retrofit the city and give more space, be more equitable with all your citizens there. So I think I just want to congratulate you for all the work. We know that this is not easy. There are definitely other forces that are against this new path, but keep going, because we want to see more people cycling and more people healthy and happy in the city of Paris. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Now, I would like to introduce you to Michael Colville Andersen. Michael is an urban design expert, host of the Life Size City from Copenhagen, Denmark. And he will talk about cycling and how he sees cycling from his point of view, being a person that lives in Copenhagen and that cycles, I'm sure, very often. Please.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to multitask here by sharing my screen. And there it comes there. Pleasure to be speaking every time about reestablishing the bicycle as transport in our cities. The most difficult task for me is to try and summarize 12 years of working in bicycle urbanism in over 100 cities around the world in 10 to 12 minutes. So this is probably the hardest thing I've had to do all year. But I'm going to start with changing the question. This is really important for us in cities around the world. We've been asking the same questions for decades and never thinking to maybe change it and get some different answers. Changing the question is incredibly important. And if we talk about transport, this is the question that needs to be changed quickly in every city around the world. For the better part of 70 years in most parts of the world, we've only asked one question of our traffic engineers, and that is, how many cars can we fit down the street? Their entire education is built around answering this one question. And we know now after many, many decades that we haven't got any useful answers from them about this question. So the cool cities, the cool kids around the world, they are asking a different question. They're changing it, and they're changing one word in this question. They're now asking, how many people can we move down the street? How many people? Using all the stuff that we've invented, all the public transport forms, but also, of course, the bicycle as transport. Now, the model I made at the bottom there, it literally has 10 times the capacity for moving humans down a street than the model at the top that we all just copy pasted from the Americans in the 1950s. This is the quickest guide to traffic planning. I only have 12 minutes, right? So the quickest guide to traffic planning you'll ever see. Prioritize the 3 transport forms on the left. Give them a fast A to B through a city. And on the right, we make driving difficult. We make it more expensive, inaccessible. We reduce the travel times, make it less competitive. All the campaigns in the world to ride a bike, it's good for you, they mean nothing unless we're doing that 4th line. We also need a new urban toolbox. We have been dominated by traffic engineering philosophies and the industry for so long. We need to start using modern urban planning, transport psychology, anthropology, sociology, intermodality, in order to achieve our very important goals of reestablishing our life-size cities. And then at the end of it, we can ask the engineers to come into the room and see how they can help us. I call it A to B-ism. If you make the bicycle the fastest way from A to B, people will ride bicycles. It's inherent in us, in our urban DNA as Homo sapiens. The three transport forms on the left are intermodal. If my tire is flat in Copenhagen in the morning, oh, it's irritating, but then I hop on a bus or a metro, combine it with walking. It doesn't require much effort from me at all. If we know that motorists are the last people to change their mode of transportation. So we need some very strong incentives for them to not bother with that. Luckily, we have 100 years, more than that even, of best practice in bicycle planning. I stand on the shoulders of generations of bicycle planners who have figured all of this out for us. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Everything is there. Everything is ready to copy paste. In Denmark, it might be interesting to hear that we only have 4 types of bicycle infrastructure in our bicycle planning. One of these 4 designs of infrastructure fits every street in Denmark and every street in every city on the planet. We have boiled everything down to something simple, effective, and beautiful. That's what Danish design is all about, but it applies also to our infrastructure for bikes. By reducing it to this, we don't have to talk about it. We don't need long discussions about what type of infrastructure here or there on this street or the other. We just pick one and it works. We save money. We get results quicker than we would ever have done before. And we start saving urban lives in the process. Now, it's really not rocket science. After 100 years of best practice, I do this all the time. I take intersections around the world and I try to fix them according to best practice. This is one in Paris, randomly, at the foot of the Eiffel Tower. I call this the arrogance of space. This is how much space is given to cars, and yet so few people are actually using it, so few citizens. But it takes me about 5 minutes with a pencil to make it bicycle friendly based on best practice. And okay, a few hours in Photoshop as well, sure. But really, it's that simple. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have all the tools that we need. Now, this is a very dark year in many ways, but for me as an urbanist, working in bicycle urbanism for more than a decade, the most brilliant flash of light has been all of these cities that are desperately and quickly and effectively trying to find space for bikes, temporary bike lanes, but also widening sidewalks, taking away parking for public space, for outdoor serving, for cafes and restaurants. I have been absolutely amazed at how quickly very unusual cities have done it. There's the usual suspects who do things well, but the strangest cities on the planet have been incredibly creative and visionary in their work. I like to highlight, I've been looking at this, I've been analyzing all of the things that have been happening around the world, and Paris is doing always amazing things, big fan of Paris. The ones that I've been looking at for bicycle infrastructure specifically have been Berlin and Milan. And they've been doing a lot of great work, but they have also been focusing on best practice. They have really tried to establish best practice early on in the design of their new bicycle infrastructure. Like this is a rendering from Milan's project. I was looking at this back in April and looking at how they're going to be designing it. And Milan also, I think Milan was one of the first cities that said, yeah, by the way, all of this temporary temporary bike lanes, we're going to do this permanently. Okay, they said it from the very beginning. This is our window of opportunity to change the question, to improve urban lives and to force the urban change that we so desperately need. So amazing work done in these cities. I'm still seeing 2 classic mistakes, not only in 2020 with the temporary infrastructure being put in, but also before, and I hope it won't last much longer. One of them is a lack of design uniformity. I'm a designer, okay? So I want things to work. I want them to fit. I want them to be able to fit with other things. So I really see this kind of chaotic infrastructure. It's like cities are desperately trying to find space. Their engineers are out there trying to figure out where can we squeeze these damn bicycles into the city. We need to do it, but and so you see a lot of different design solutions that are bizarre. And you're riding on one kind of infrastructure, you turn right and it's a different kind of infrastructure. There's not a lot of design intelligence or design uniformity. I still see a lot of cities putting in bi-directional, also really narrow ones, like in this photo here. It's interesting to consider that in Danish planning for bicycles, We don't do bi-directional anymore. If it's on the street with cross streets, we threw it away 20 years ago because it wasn't safe enough. It also provides no access to the other side of the street for the people cycling. I still see cities, unfortunately, putting bikes in between the door zone and moving traffic. Not a very safe place to put any urban citizen who isn't in a car. It should be along the sidewalk where it has been for over 100 years. And then there's some weird stuff that happens, that we don't really understand. Bicycle infrastructure down the middle of a street with cars on either side. No access to the shops or the homes or the businesses on either side of the street. You're kind of locked into this weird space in the middle of the streets, which leads us to the fact that we need to design right from the beginning. If this is our opportunity for really forcing that urban change and transitioning our cities to something better for bicycles and for everyone, we need to design right. We have to do it in order to prove the skeptics wrong, because man, there's a lot of skeptics out there. We have to do it to make it effective, to make it work better than ever before. And we also have to do it if we're going to plan forward, right? Or whatever we're doing now has to connect up in a design way in the coming years. So we need to design right from the beginning. The other thing that's kind of weird that I'm seeing is that, this singular focus on cycling as commuting, right? This is normally something you see in the States, but it's also something I'm seeing in other cities now in Europe. The bicycle is a way to get from A to B, and we'll just get them across the urban landscape, right? As quick as possible, no fuss. And it not recognizing the fact that the bicycle is the social glue that binds our citizens, our neighborhoods, and our cities together. The social aspects of the bicycle strengthen our urban fabric. It's not just an A to B thing. It is a part of our daily life, and it has been that for decades and decades in every city around the world. One example I have is from Copenhagen. This is one of our most famous streets. This is Queen Louise's Bridge, traditional neighborhood leading to the city center. Back in 2007, it had a massive redesign. The sidewalks have been widened 5 meters on either side. The bicycle infrastructure is 4 meters on either side. The car lanes have been narrowed to the absolute minimum. Amazing transformation. What happened? This is what happened. The number of pedestrians increased by 165%. Nobody saw this coming. We just made the sidewalks wider, and yet so many people started walking there. The main reason is probably because we reduced the number of cars by 57%. Huge win for this project. It's a nicer place to walk now, and people are using it more. The number of cyclists has increased by 60%. This was already the world's busiest bicycle street with over 40,000 cyclists today, and we still got 60% more out of this project. But the thing that surprised absolutely everybody, nobody saw it coming, is the number on the right. The number of people stopping on the bridge, sitting down on the new benches, getting some beers, some pizza, bringing some friends, enjoying the sun, having a meeting, whatever, increased by 1,400%. Nobody had ever stopped on this bridge before. It was a transit zone, and now it has become a destination. You can see the numbers in the middle, how many more people we could move down this street by changing the question. 16,000 more people moving down this street than before. And in the process, we created an amazing destination. We added to the urban fabric by making an iconic new place. It's not just Copenhagen and Amsterdam, Denmark, and the Netherlands. There are also other inspirational places. Japan, the third great cycling nation. In their neighborhoods, they have simply built in the bicycle into everything they do. The bicycle is an integral part of their daily life. Everywhere you go in the neighborhoods of all Japanese cities is really inspiring. Even in a city like Detroit, where I was working in bicycle urbanism, they are doing some good work, and they're really the biggest project they did was this old abandoned railway that was a dark and dangerous place, especially after the decline of Detroit. They revamped it. They made it bicycle infrastructure, connecting neighborhoods in a way that they've never done before, except for the car. Bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, public space, an amazing improvement to this part of the city. And one thing they didn't see coming was that it increased the real estate prices. Not off the charts, but it really improved the real estate prices. So the bicycle as an economic factor with the infrastructure is amazing. We can also think about other things, not just the bike lanes. It's not always about the bikes. It's about all the other things we can do. Now, in Copenhagen, our climate change problem is torrential rain. It rains more than ever before. It floods our homes and businesses. This street here is just 500 meters from me, a buffer between moving traffic and bikes and pedestrians, and it's green while we're cycling along it. But when it rains, it is a sponge. It soaks up all the water as a reservoir. So don't only think about bikes, think about all the other things that we can put in place at the same time in order to improve our cities, in order to tackle climate change. Cycling is the best business model in the history of transportation ever. We know that in Copenhagen, we like to measure everything in Denmark, and we know all too well that all the people cycling in Copenhagen, 63% of the population, they contribute 233 million euros a year to the city. Pure profit, budgetable amount in the next year's budget because of the cost benefit analyses that show how healthy it is to cycle in our city. In the past 10 years, the city of Copenhagen has invested 286 million euros in bicycle infrastructure. I am really bad at math, okay, but I can look at that and I can say that's probably the best business model in the history of bicycle urbanism anywhere. Look how much we're making based on how much we are spending. It's funny to consider that in north of Copenhagen, we built 3 kilometers of motorway extension, like an extra little add-on to the motorway. And that cost us 280 million euros, the same price as 10 years of investment in cycling. That is the choice of a new generation of cities and of politicians. Do you get 3 more kilometers of motorway? Who needs that? Or do you invest in the future of your city as a bicycle-friendly, equitable, healthy place? We know that every time somebody rides a bicycle 1 kilometer, we earn 23 cents, pure profit for society. Every time somebody drives a car 1 kilometer, we pay out 87 cents, throw it into a big black hole, and never see it again. We know that cycling is good for businesses. 50 years of studies from all over the world confirm it time and time again, that if you put in best practice bicycle infrastructure, shops and businesses will profit. Cycle tracks, if you do them right, they will increase the profits of these shops by 30 to 50% all over the world. Cycling citizens use 100 euros more every month in the shops. So start taking out those car parking spots and putting in 10 parking spots for bikes so people can get to these shops. Last thing here is, while we're on the topic, let's not forget cargo bike logistics. Every time I order a package here, it comes to me by cargo bike on that last mile. And this is something that happened in cities everywhere, but this is something that is back. In more than 100 cities around Europe, we are delivering our packages by cargo bikes. This study I was a part of a few years ago shows that 51% of all goods moved in a city can be moved by bike or by cargo bike. This is the time we start setting up micro distribution centers to allow cargo bikes to deliver the last mile logistics of all of the packages that we're buying online. This is the time that we need to do this. Imagine how many trucks and vans we could produce in our cities if we did this all over the world. If you like what I'm saying, there's a whole book about it, The Definitive Guide to Global Bicycle Urbanism. But for now, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mikael. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you for sharing all your thoughts with us and to make us so hopeful that we really know how to do it, that we really know what is the impact. The main question here is why it's not happening at a global scale. So with that, I would like to welcome our high-level panel to start our conversation. And let me introduce you to them. It is my pleasure to welcome the Minister of Transport from Ethiopia, Minister Dagmawit Moez. Minister for Climate, Infrastructure, Energy and Mobility from Wallonia, Belgium, Philippe Henry. Warm welcome. Dear Nicolás Estupiñán, Secretary of Mobility of Bogotá, Colombia. Welcome, Nicolás, bienvenido. And of course, we will have in the panel Minister François Bausch, who you know is the Minister for Mobility and Public Works from the government of Luxembourg and a big bicycling champion. Welcome, all of you. All right, so let's get started. We have seen what has happened in Paris in just few months. To be completely honest, it has taken generations, as David Belliard has told us. It was just not overnight, but they were good at grasping the opportunity, at sensing what the community needed, and just starting to expand cycling in Paris. And then we have heard from Michael on what are all these steps that we need to take and how do we need to reflect on how to make cycling. One thing that was very impactful for me is to really reflect that we know how to build cycling infrastructure, that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and that we know what are these forces that are probably opposing to these changes. So I would like to first of all, thank you for joining me in the panel and ask you how your cities, how your countries have started changing due to COVID-19, due to the pandemic. How are they embracing more cycling? What are the challenges that you have had? And let me get started with Minister Dartmouth-Moles.
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, I'd like to say thank you again on behalf of my ministry and Ethiopian government for the support that we're getting from WRI. And I really want to appreciate your relentless support provided to us to realize active and sustainable mode of transport in my country. And I do hope that this is going to continue ahead as well. So as a transport minister and as a city resident, I believe the pleasure of leading a decent lifestyle in our cities and to own a fair kind of share on every activity that we do in our cities depends or rely on how far we bring attention of using our streets for people rather than using them for cars. In my country, in Ethiopia, motorized transport is still favored over non-motorized transport, which led to increasing congestion and worsening air quality, of course. But now my government is adopting a more equitable approach that is going to address the mobility needs of our citizens, especially in urban areas. And during the pandemic season, we ratified the National Non-Motorized Transport Strategy. And the vision of our non-motorized transport strategy is that to provide Ethiopian cities and rural centers with safe and efficient kind of transport system that is going to give more weight for walking and cycling networks. And that is going to provide a good opportunity for all the residents to have an access and opportunity for different kinds of activities that they carry out in their day-to-day activities. So from this vision statement that I mentioned earlier, it is possible to simply understand that bringing active mobility in Ethiopia is a must, and it enhances both social and economic opportunities. So as we keep on providing our people with enough pedestrian and cycling ways, it means simply we are providing accessible transport options for the largest share of Ethiopian population, especially in regional towns and urban centers that we have. So we believe that our non-motorized transport strategy that we ratified during the pandemic season would also contribute for inclusive urbanization, as the largest share of our people and residents informally uses walking as the major or dominant mode of transport. And we believe that if we are able to provide decent walking and cycling ways across our urban centers, definitely it will greatly reduce the transportation shortage that we face in our urban centers. And active transport mode is much cheaper And obviously it is more accessible than any form of transport. And we also believe that it could benefit the urban poor, women, and the youth, and simply get or give access to cheaper and healthier mode of transport. And the NMT, or our national non-motorized transport strategy, is not the only issue that we give priority in our policy and strategy formulation. Rather, recently we ratified the transport policy of our country, which gave much emphasis for non-motorized transport. So by doing so, in our 10-year perspective plan that we recently finalized, we have stated the guideline on how cities are expected to plan. And based on this, definitely the implementation is going to be in a way that we want it to be. So as a developing country, we may not need to give back to our people, because the infrastructure that we have is not as such sufficient enough at this state. And we believe that we have a latecomer advantage to plan our ways, or to plan our roads in a way that is going to benefit by taking the lessons from those developed countries, as we have seen the practice of Paris, which I really appreciate. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dagmawit. And congratulations, you have been busy putting together that strategy. It was the right time to really plan for getting your bikers and your pedestrians safe back in the cities in Ethiopia. I would like to turn to Minister Philippe Henry. In certain news that you said there are two durable positive outcomes that will outlast COVID-19, working from home and cycling. Do you think this is going to be really durable? Do you think we are going to be able to retain cycling in our cities?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the question. Thank you first for the invitation, really, to the World Resources Institute and from Minister Bausch. It was very interesting up to now, and the inspiring introductions was very, very interesting. I think that there are things that are happening at the same time in the different countries and the different cities, especially. Of course, the situation was before the crisis, the health crisis, different. In our country, the bicycle was not very much used by the population, and we had decided last year, because we have now a new government since last year in the regional parts of Belgium, like Wallonia, we had huge objectives because we want to go to the Paris Agreement objectives for the climate. So it was, of course, necessary to have important objectives in the mobility, to have much more modal part for the active déplacements, bicycle or by foot or public transport. So all of those objectives were decided last year, and then we had the lockdown and the crisis, which is still there now. And it's true that it also in our country, we could observe in the different cities a new ask from the population to be able to use the bicycle more, to have space in the cities, to be able to move with a healthy approach and so on. So this could go in the side of the objectives we had decided, and also the infrastructures we had decided to invest, because of course it takes a certain time. So to come back to your questions, that's true. I think we have many inconveniences of this crisis. Of course, it's not a very happy year, a very happy time. but for the displacements, it can go to new approaches, and it can effectively go to more use of the active displacement, and that can be useful also for the climate objectives. So yes, I think that will be concrete in our decisions, for the public decisions, and that will be concrete in the population behaviors.
That is really fantastic to hear, Mr. Henry, and we are so happy to hear that within your strategy for climate change, cycling is playing a very important role. I want to now start talking to Secretary of Mobility from Bogota, Nicolás Estupiñán. Bogota has been working on cycling for many years now. But has COVID made any changes on the infrastructure for cyclists? How are citizens using the streets in Bogota right now, Nicolás?
Hola, Claudia, and thank you very much for the invitation, and thank to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all these ministers and all these very knowledgeable people about transportation, mobility, and urbanism. Well, COVID, as Mikael presented, has been an opportunity for us. As we know, it has been presenting some serious challenges for the other sectors, such as health, security, education. But for us, for transportation, it has really become as an opportunity. So we are very excited about taking over this opportunity. But you made a question before when Mikael finished his presentation, and you were asking, like, why are not we seeing this as much as we would like to see it? And I have a very basic answer, and it's because it's very difficult to do it. Sometimes we, and I just want to take a couple of minutes to share with you some of the problems that we are living here in Bogota, because of course, we want to redistribute space, and this is exactly what we're doing. And this is not precisely because we are crazy about bicycles and we hate cars. It is because it's more efficient, and it has a very just component about justice, right? We want to make sure that everybody, according to the number of trips that we see, have sufficient space so that they can actually engage and use and have access to urban opportunities that are created by all these cities, right? Cities exist because they bring together a lot of urban opportunities, and mobility not always bring us closer to those opportunities. So here in Bogota, through these pandemic times, we started redistributing public space. As you mentioned, Bogota has been doing this for the last, 20, 30 years. And we had a fantastic response from the people. We doubled the percentage of people that are using bicycles today. We went from 6% of the total trips to 13% of total trips today during pandemic times. And we continue redistributing public space. But basically because we want to make sure that low-income people and people that have the greater needs have better ways to move, have more direct connections, and have more safe spaces. But we are having a hard time with public transportation and freight that also are big users of these corridors. And to be honest, we're seeing a great response. We're seeing a decrease in 58% of accidents, of road accidents with cyclists. But we are having a lot of trouble with freight, particularly now in some of these corridors. So we are, so this short-term plan to bring these 84 kilometers of pop-out bike lanes has been really exciting. It has helped not only people move from one way to another, but also has improved the rhythm of the economic recovery, because people not only want to go from A to B, but they also want to stay in public spaces. And through the other role that the street have, of course, to serve as a place to stay, we've seen a lot of increases in the economic activity in these corridors. But we need to give a second thought on how to reallocate cargo and freight and public transportation routes, because currently we're seeing a lot of trouble in bringing together all the different actors, not only about the private vehicles and single drivers and all the stuff that we all know about, but we're having a lot of trouble with freight. Just wanted to throw that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, for your candid response. And this is precisely the type of conversation that we want to have, because there are many cities around the world that are watching us today, and they want to really understand and learn what are those difficulties, where is where you are going to start hitting a little bit the wall, and how you can make progress. And one thing that is really wonderful of the cyclist community is that we are ready to help each other with ideas, with tests. So I think it will be wonderful to reflect on those topics that you have brought up as difficult to manage now. I want to turn now to Minister Francois Bausch, and you made international headlines on February 29. You made public transportation free, and a couple of weeks later, we had all these issues with COVID-19. So how was that crisis for Luxembourg, Minister Bausch? And do you have more people cycling because of that?
Thank you, Claudia. First of all, I want to say that our strategy to making public transport free is, like I always say, it's only a cherry on the cake of a strategy that we have, and the cake is really developing a multimodal strategy on mobility in general. And you know that when I started as a minister 7 years ago, and when I started then also to explain that we must have this multimodal strategy and promote, for example, cycling in a country like Luxembourg, where you know the Germans, they are building the cars, and the residents in Luxembourg, they are buying the cars. We have the highest motorization degree, individual motorization degree, I would say, in the world. It's crazy. And many people told me it would be political suicide to start in this direction and trying to convince the residents or the Luxembourgish population to use again more the bike. But it's not true. It's a question. The population are using bikes when the infrastructure is good, when the quality of the infrastructure is good, and when you really encourage them to do this. And we started to do this the last years. It's difficult, it's not so easy, you must convince, but it's possible, because every infrastructure that we put in place, we can see immediately after that the population is using it, that they rediscovered the bike. And then came COVID-19. And COVID-19, I observed then an enormous cycling boom in Luxembourg. The shops ran out of bicycles to sell, for example. So we discovered that it was amazing to discover that so many people took out their bikes and really got in the streets, because the streets were empty, really, I would say 60 to 70% less of cars in the streets, so many space there for them. And then the question was, will it stay when we reopen, when really the lockdown will be finished? And what I discovered, yes, it stays. And especially what I discover also today, that the lobby for cyclists, the lobby to really push on politics, to create more cycling infrastructure, has become enormously bigger with the COVID-19. So thanks to the virus for this, to help us really to push in direction of more cycling infrastructure. So at the moment we are, I would say, at the tipping point, really, in the strategy and also in the development of the mentality of the population. I think we must use this tipping point really to go now in the good direction, and that's what we want to do. And I want to give you only one example. I presented a few days ago a new project. It's a highway between two cities that are only 13 kilometers apart. This highway normally is completely congested. It's the two main cities of the countries. You have most of the job concentrated in these two areas. And rather than adding more lanes for cars, we are building now, for example, a cycling highway along this highway. And if you could show maybe, yeah, that's just the image. it's a good example. On the left side, you can see the highway that it is today, and in peak hours, it's completely congested. And what we are building now on the right side is a new fast tram that will link the capital of the country to the south of the country. And besides this tram, we will build this cycling highway. It's a cycling highway that will go over 12 kilometers, and that will allow us then to really link these two big cities and the two big industrial economic hubs that we have in Luxembourg. And if I would have proposed a project like this, I would say, I don't know, 5, 4, 6 years ago, it would have a discussion, enormous discussion in Luxembourg. Everybody would say, this guy is crazy. What is he doing there? But now, I had now 2 meetings, 2 really virtual meetings also via Zoom with the population, with a big participation. We had really large parts of the population that participate in these meetings. And everybody was enthusiastic about what you showed. And everybody asked me, will you also then build a link to these cycle highways from my little town, my little city, to this new express highway that we are building there? So it's a good example. And I think that the crisis that we had in the last months help us a lot really to get really a bigger acceptance in the population for projects like this.
How fantastic to see your leadership, Mr. Bausch, and how you are really making tough decisions, ones, as you have said, that can cost you very much politically, but you are demonstrating that citizens really respond positively to high quality, safe infrastructure for cycling. So that is really very positive to see. We are going into this pandemic, and things are changing. We have heard about the development of the vaccine yesterday. It seems like we might be looking at more months in this situation, but then people are going to be coming out. And how are we going to decide what our city is going to look like? Do we want our cities to go back to pre-COVID-19, or are we able to really change that curves? I think the example that you are giving about these 2 cities connecting 13 kilometers is a very interesting one. And with that, I would like to turn to Minister Philippe Henry, because you are leading a region rather than just a city. Wallonia is beloved for cyclists. They go there to cycle in your hilly parts of Wallonia. But are you thinking about cycling only within the cities, or are you also planning a more regional approach?
Yes, in fact, it's different to think about cycling in the rural areas and in the cities. Of course, we have several cities, small cities in Wallonia, in comparison to Paris or the bigger cities, of course. But we have also a big part of the region which is a rural area, and also with a certain relief. So it's difficult to sometimes we have heard the last years it's difficult to go to with the bicycles, because you need to make a big effort, it's different, of course, if you make competition with the bicycle, but not for the use every day to go to the work or to the school. In fact, I don't think it's the real problem, because if you compare, for example, to the Netherlands, which are in our neighborhood, and which use the bicycle very, very much since a long time. Of course, it's quite flat as a country, but you also have the wind. So there are other difficulties. I think they certainly have main infrastructures which they have invested in since several years, and now they have very, very efficient infrastructures. And also, we can now have the benefit of electric bicycles. So now it's more possible to have a cycle politics on a bigger area. But I think what is very important is to think of the whole displacement for the people they have each day from their house to their job or to another place. I think if you have to be efficient in comparison to the car, sometimes it's necessary to use different type of modal part on the way. So you can use first the bicycle, then go to a station for catching a train, for example, or to another place where you can have car sharing or another solution. So it's very important for the bigger distances to have an approach of considering together the different transport modes, and not only one mode in replacement of the car. And that's what we are trying to do now in Wallonia, in the infrastructures and in the investments we want to make in the following years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Henry. And it's indeed absolutely important to think about this multimodality. Right now, public transportation, massive public transportation is suffering around the world. But with these ideas of making it multimodal, we can really revamp also mass transportation. Minister Dagmar Witt-Moers, you have been internationally recognized for Menget Lesu, which is the day without car, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. How was that initiative taken by your citizens? Was it difficult, or they embraced it right at the beginning? Please tell us a little bit, what is the impact of the car-free day on the cycling culture that you are building in your country?
Thank you very much, Claudia. As you said it rightly, that in our capital, not only in our capital, but in different parts of our regional centers, is getting more popular from time to time. And I believe that this is happening because it is the result of a shared vision between the government and the people. And I believe that this is something that our people was waiting for quite longer period of time. Because, as I said previously, we used to construct roads for vehicles, not for people. But when we say that at least once in a month, every Sunday, all roads, especially urban roads, should be closed for pedestrians and cyclists to be able to enjoy the road rather than letting the vehicles to ride on them 7 days a week and 24 hours a day. So I believe that it is the result of a shared vision and the engagement of different stakeholders. Those who are campaigning for having a car-free day has resulted a lot in attaining such kind of result. And every Sunday of the month, at the 4th week of the month, be it a child, an old person, the youngsters, they wait for the day to be able to enjoy the road. They come up with their cycles, kids come up with their cycles, youngsters come up with their different kinds of non-motorized transport modes that they have in their hands. So they enjoy and celebrate the road. So we believe that this is something that we should have done earlier. And now we need to expand it to other cities, in addition to the cities which already started celebrating the roads. So when we work with different stakeholders, and when we engage different stakeholders like the police and regional governments and city administration, we have seen how we can be successful in availing our roads for our people. So this is something really that could be taken as a lesson, and we are learning a lot from there. Even during the COVID pandemic, what we have learned a lot is that even to be able to keep physical distancing along our pedestrian walkways, as they were not built as per the standard, it was very difficult to keep our people safe. So we have taken lots of lessons during this pandemic, and the strategy that we ratified during this season is going to help or transform the whole system that we have in our country and can be an example for other African countries as well. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, Minister Dagmar Whitmoise. It's so encouraging to see how the city and the country embraces not motorized transportation, and you can see your people being really happy about using the public space. That I'm pretty sure will be also part of the strategy that you are developing and that you will be putting together in the cities. Congratulations for all that work. And Nicolas, Bogota has been doing cars all day for many decades now. Do you see your citizens coming out and really asking the city to give more space for cycling?
Claudia, thanks, because that's a the timing of that question is very proper. Right now, we are developing our long-term land use plan, which is going to be the land use plan that governs Bogota for the next 12 years. And the mayor, Claudia Lopez, has asked us to change the unit of analysis for that long-term plan. She has asked us to think about the smaller scale, because every time we develop these regional land use plans, we would think about these transportation corridors. As we used to do transportation planners, we used to focus on the big corridors that would set the future of the development of the uses of the land over the next years. So now we're going back to basics, and I think it's a very proper way to address this construction and the design of this new plan. And we are going to start transforming some of these corridors, some of these streets, into green corridors. And we're gonna start with Carrera Séptima. For those of you who have had the fortune to visit Bogota, I'm sure you will remember Séptima, because it's the avenue that is right before the mountains. And it's a very beautiful avenue, but of course, the space is today mostly governed by private vehicles. So we are finishing the participation process through different tools, and I want to thank Carlos Felipe Pardo and all the team from NUMO and from the Espacio and WRI that has helped us bringing together all the different opinions of people. So we have been using this very interesting tool called Street Mix, which actually allows for people to go online or download the app and actually tell us how they want the space to be redistributed. And it's fascinating what we are looking. We are observing that people ask in the different and the multiple ways and tools that we have for them to participate. If we ask them on street through surveys, if we go to their households and we survey them, if we ask them to join us through Street Mix, people want more space for pedestrians and for bicycles. And that's a common aspect, and that is very recomforting. We have been asking all the neighbors of this corridor, Carrera Séptima, and we are asking all the people that live in Bogota. And we have received more than 49,000 different proposals of how they want that corridor to be redistributed. And the common objective for everybody is to have more space for bicycles and more space for pedestrians. People are telling us that they want to breathe better in that corridor, that they want to go slower. They don't want to go fast from point A to point B. They want to stay in the corridor. older people were telling us that they would like to participate in telling the story of the different transformations that that corridor has had over the last few decades. So it's very interesting how people are engaging in the discussion and how they want to participate and how they want to become of the day-to-day life of that corridor. It's very interesting what is happening, but yes, the short answer is yes. People have been asking for more space for bicycles and for pedestrians, even in those corridors that I was mentioning at the beginning that seem to be the more troublesome because of the different actors that we have to allocate, freight and public transportation. Even in those corridors when different surveys have been done through social networks, 60–70% of the people that reply to these surveys, they say that they want to see more space, greener space for pedestrians and for bicycles. So I think that through these times, the transformation, the collective transformation that society has carried on is far more powerful than a legal transformation, right? Like, we have not imposed this transformation, but people collectively have understood and have appropriated this transformation in a collective way, which is far more powerful and far more sustainable in the long term than any legal decree or whatever that we can actually have.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. And that is really wonderful to hear, is the voice of the citizens. And I think now, as we wrap up this webinar, and I have to thank my panelists for joining me today, I see a couple of very important topics coming out from Europe to Latin America to Africa. The voice of the citizens have been heard very loud. We need more public space, and we need that public space to be safe, to protect us. We cannot risk our lives. We are also hearing very clearly that in the strategies that you are all putting together, there is this concern about public health. How can we protect our citizens? Cycling has come out as this lifeline to help us move in a safe way during the pandemic. But it can also be impactful with the improvement of air quality, which is in a terrible condition right now in our cities. It makes us more physically active. So in terms of public health, this is a topic that should be at the top of the agenda. Now, there is another big concern. We are hopefully making some progress on this pandemic, but there is a looming concern on climate change. It is there, and we have to act. In mobility, we are not going to make any dent if we are not to start to think about how we integrate cycling at a really high rates in our cities. So we are here to learn and to make sure we take all this knowledge, as Michael was telling us. We don't need to reinvent the wheel right now. We need to really act. We need to make sure our cycle lanes, our cycle infrastructure is safe if we want to attract all these people. We have talked today about the importance of multimodality. It is not, and or. We need mass transportation in our cities to go to farther distances. How do we connect cycle to mass transportation? We need to work around that. Cycling today has been very, very clearly made that it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for our cities to build back better. So with that, I just want to thank you very much for joining me today. And for the audience to have joined us today, very, very warm thank you from Minister Bausch and Anita Gupta. We hope you are working on your cycling strategies. And if you need support, we are all here as a community to support you. Thank you very much.